Welcome to week 2. Okay, here we go. So last week you would have looked at the introduction to Indigenous affairs in Australia with the colonisation or invasion of the British coming in and taking over from the Indigenous populations. So this lesson we're going to be looking at, or this week, we're looking at the backgrounds to the struggle for rights and freedoms, which really is inclusive of the Day of Mourning in 1938, which you would have covered last week. And this week we're looking in particular at the stolen generations. So I just want you to watch this. It goes for 2 minutes and then we'll have a talk about it in a sec.
When the first black settlers arrived in Barbecue area, they found a native population sheltering around primitive open fires, attempting to cook their food with crude implements, and even seeming to take pleasure in burning their meat. I've always been fascinated by white people. The evidence of their culture is all around us. Their art, their industry, their way of life. But what do we think of white people? Excuse me, sir. What do you think about white people?
White people? You've got to be joking. Well, I don't know. I've never met one.
I love their music. They can't dance, unfortunately, but I love their music.
Stand little whitey boys, stand in line. One got drunk and they were behind.
They're a developing people. They're starting to take an interest in the world around them. And this is a good sign.
5 years ago, I decided to find out more about these strange and fascinating people. So I came here, to this white ghetto, and I lived for 6 months with a typical white family in this typical white house. Do you remember the day I first came to stay with you?
Oh, yes.
Very good.
Yes.
And what did you think when you first saw me?
Good.
Oh, very good.
Yes.
A great honour.
I tried to fit in here, to live amongst these people as one of the family, with a minimum of disruption to their daily lives. I wanted to observe them as they really are. These are some of the first pictures I took of the family.
So that little clip there is based on a film called Barbecue Area. It's a satirical video sort of mimicking how white people have documented the Indigenous way of life. And it was done in the 80s, so you can sort of tell through the fashion and the way they speak. But, why isn't that coming up? But I want you to think about, what does it highlight about society's treatment of Indigenous Australians? Maybe at that time it reflects more, and we have grown in the last 30, 40 odd years, but we still have those basic assumptions and those hidden biases when we think about Indigenous Australians. So I suggest goes for about half an hour. The whole video is on YouTube, so look it up and have a watch. It's quite funny. Okay, so the focus of our study, we are looking at pretty much backgrounds to Indigenous loss of rights, and then the fight for those rights and freedoms, which happen through activism, and we also look at sources that describe the experiences during these times. So, context, post-1788. So we looked at this last week. There was a 90% reduction in the Aboriginal population when the white man settled, and this was due to disease, the loss of their land, massacres, genocide, and racial cleansing that happened all at the front with frontier violence, where there was that assumption that Indigenous people were primitive and they needed to be gotten rid of because they were a pest to the white people. Okay, so policies of the Australian government. So during these sorts of everything that's happening in the world is influenced generally by what's happening in Britain, and by the late 19th century, ideas of social Darwinism were becoming quite influential. So you guys might know what social Darwinism is. It's the idea that that the strong will survive and the weak will die out, and that people needed to be civilized in order to survive in a civilized society. So the government decided to put in a range of policies that would call paternalism policies that would control the Indigenous population in a fatherly sort of way. And it was used as a defense for a lot of the actions they took, especially for removing children, like the idea that dad steps in and takes care of any situation was the sort of the foundation of the Australian government's ideology at the time. So, policies of protection. Protection policy, so there's a few stages when it comes to Indigenous affairs in Australia. They first started out with this idea of protection, and then there was assimilation, where they wanted people to blend in, and now it's more of a multicultural freedom of expression. But protection was the idea that the government would implement and administer laws for Indigenous peoples, and it had pretty much very big control of their everyday lives. So it was, access to their health, education, employment, where they had to live, and the removal of their children from their families, which we know as the stolen generations. So aims of these policies was to civilise and protect the Aboriginal people, to educate and teach them in white ways, and pretty much to eradicate all traces of Aboriginality, because they thought that if they could, remove their culture, breed them into white society, eventually the Indigenous DNA would cease to exist. So, how did protection policy work? Also, remember that the little pen and paper means you have to write this down. So, Aboriginal people were moved on to reserves or missions. These were settlements run by the government to look after Aboriginal people. So pretty much it was almost like with the Holocaust, putting them in a ghetto. So it was run by the church or a religious group. Police were given the power to remove Aboriginal children from their families, and the children were expected to adopt a white culture at this time. This caused, obviously, a profound sense of loss for both mother and child. But not only that, loss of culture, loss of connection and community would have lasting ramifications that are still experienced today through the legacy of not having that connection to culture. But we'll talk about that later on. So, also, the children who were removed were trained in skills, so they would be effective citizens, in commas, and they were taught habits that would give them employment with colonial settlers, but generally they were used as free or cheap labour, almost like slaves or servants, boys as farmhands, girls as domestic servants. So that's all, taking away their right to employment and to monetary gain. Like, it was quite nasty and brutal. So, abduction. I want you to pause it and read this perspective. So this was a child that was taken during the stolen generation. You can tell there that, for the white people, it was just, the thing that would happen. Comes in, takes a child, takes it to the train station to get sent to a mission where the parents, they would try and get their children back, but they were fighting against a very oppressive system. So a lot of the parents didn't see their children again, which is very upsetting. So I'll watch this lady here.
My name is Lowiger. The name Lois O'Donoghue, of course, comes from the missionaries gave me Lois, which of course is a biblical name, the mother of Timothy, and O'Donoghue, of course, is my father's name. My father, Tom O'Donoghue, who I never met.
Who was he?
He was an Irishman who came to Australia and found himself as a station manager at Granite Downs in the northwest of South Australia, which is now Pitjantjatjara lands. I was with my mother for 2 years, and I was the youngest child at the time of being removed by the missionaries, and the only thing I know about, I can't remember any of it, but I was told that it was the custom in those days for missionaries to go out on a fairly regular basis with the aim, of course, of collecting the half-caste children and taking them away to mission life, which was meant to be for our good.
So yeah, you can tell that even her name has been changed. So she was only 2 years old. She didn't know really anything of her family, and yeah, they changed the name to Louise, and yeah, it just shows that the oppressiveness of the white culture over the Indigenous population. So, source analysis, I want you to pause this and answer these questions. This was an article written in a newspaper, where these are children who had obviously been taken from their families in Darwin, and they were trying to find them a home to, work in or grow up in and work in. So have a read. It's very interesting, even the writing down the bottom of somebody answering that advertisement. So we are going to watch the Rabbit Proof Fence. I've posted a click view link that you should be able to access. It's a really good film, and it's quite sad, upsetting. So I want you to watch it. There is a worksheet that you'll need to fill out when you do that. So watch it with all this in mind, that it was through the Aborigines Act of 1900, it gave the government permission, the ability to remove children who was they were considered from age 6 to be wards of the state. So that meant they had no parents. They were practically orphans, and they were taken from their families and sent to reserves. Even though it says age 6 plus, a lot of children who were younger were also taken. So in the video, or in the film, there's a dude called Neville. He's played by Kenneth Branagh, who's a good actor. I really like him. But Neville's had this policy in Western Australia called the absorption policy, where it meant that there was a plan to either arrange marriages, breed out half-castes, which are children born half colonial, half Indigenous. So eventually, through breeding, there would be no trace of Aboriginality, which, doesn't really it makes sense. Like, there's always still going to be Aboriginal descent, but he had that idea that if you keep breeding with white blood, eventually there will be no Aboriginality present. So that was the idea. If you take the children away, you breed them with white people, eventually their offspring will be white. So, task. Watch the film, answer the questions on the worksheet I've posted, and then I want you to complete this task as well. So how useful is the film for a historian studying the impacts of the stolen generation on Indigenous Australians? So you've got quite a big workload. This is, remember, the work for the week. I will organise Zooms to talk to you during the week as well. If you've got any questions, or if you're interested in a bit more facts relating to this, please let me know, and I'll post another video about it. Okay, get to work.